The combat deck of Outpost Nexus 7 was renowned throughout the Sectora vast. Echoing chamber filled with holographic drones and multi-species cadets. The artificial day cycle flickered in constant flux, casting intermittent shadows across the training mats where 14-year-old Leo stood, wiry and silent, his eyes fixed on the towering form of his alien instructor. Krell was an imposing figure, 7 feet of taut muscle and leathery blue skin. 4 arms crossed over his chest as he surveyed the cadets with narrowed yellow eyes. The atmosphere on the deck was tense, a palpable sense of anticipation hanging in the recycled air. "Again," Krell barked, his voice reverberating off the metallic walls. "Your form is sloppy, human. The Emperor's forces would laugh at such weakness." Leo gritted his teeth and repeated the complex maneuver, his muscles burning with exertion. He'd been at Outpost Nexus 7 for 6 months now, and still, he felt like an outsider. The other cadets Andromedans, Centaurians, and a handful of humans kept their distance, sensing Krell's particular disdain for the quiet boy from Earth. As they broke for hydration, Leo found himself standing near a lanky Centaurian whose elongated limbs seemed perpetually in motion. "Tough session," the Centaurian offered, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid succession. Leo nodded, allowing himself a rare moment of connection. "My grandfather would have called it a good workout, though." An Andromedan cadet with iridescent scales snickered nearby. "Your grandfather? Was he some sort of space janitor?" Something tightened in Leo's chest pride mixed with a fierce protectiveness. "Actually," he said, voice quiet but steady, "Grandpa Mal trained the Emperor's elite guard." The words hung in the air for a moment before Krell's massive form appeared behind them, casting a shadow that seemed to drop the temperature by several degrees. "What did you say, human?" Krell's voice was dangerously soft. Leo turned, suddenly aware of the silence that had fallen across the combat deck. Every cadet stood frozen, watching. "I said my grandfather trained the Emperor's elite guard, sir." Krell's upper lip curled back, revealing jagged teeth. "Malcolm Reynolds? That old station mechanic?" He laughed, a harsh sound that grated on Leo's ears. "Your grandfather is nothing but a glorified wrench-turner. The Emperor's guard is trained by the finest warriors in the galaxy, not some human tinkerer." Leo's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he kept his expression neutral. "It's true, sir. He doesn't talk about it much, but..." The slap came without warning, Krell's massive hand connecting with Leo's cheek with enough force to snap his head to the side. The sound echoed across the deck, followed by shocked gasps from the assembled cadets. "You will not spread lies in my combat deck," Krell hissed, leaning down until his face was inches from Leo's. "Your grandfather is a nobody. And you? You're barely worthy to polish the boots of the Emperor's guard, let alone claim kinship with their trainer." Leo stood rooted to the spot, a crimson bruise already blooming on his pale cheek. The stain of falsehood, as Krell would call it. Around them, the holographic drones flickered and wavered, as if the very air was disturbed by the rupture in the deck's veneer of discipline. The Andromedan cadet smirked, but the Centaurian looked away, uncomfortable with the public humiliation. The rest of the class stared, some with pity, others with thinly veiled satisfaction at seeing the quiet human put in his place. Leo completed his drills in silence for the remainder of the session, ignoring the throbbing pain in his cheek and the whispers that followed him across the combat deck. When dismissal finally came, he was the first to exit, slipping away before any of the other cadets could approach him. Instead of taking the main thoroughfare back to the residential quadrant, Leo ducked into the maintenance tunnels, a labyrinth of narrow passages that honeycombed the interior of Outpost Nexus 7. Here, in the dim emergency lighting and hum of machinery. He could breathe. No prying eyes, no whispers, no alien instructor waiting to catch him in a moment of weakness. The bruise pulsed with each heartbeat as he navigated the familiar route. These tunnels had become his sanctuary over the past months, a place where he could be alone with his thoughts and memories of Earth off Grandpa Mal teaching him to repair an anti-grav unit, strong hands guiding his smaller ones with infinite patience. Leo emerged near the hydroponics garden, a vast chamber filled with earth plants and exotic alien flora. The artificial lighting here was warm amber, designed to mimic Earth's sun, and the air was thick with moisture and the scent of growing things. He found his grandfather there, as he often did at this hour. Malcolm Reynolds stood with his back to the entrance, his weathered hands deep in the soil of a planter box. At 62, he was still straight-backed and strong, though his dark hair had gone silver at the temples and fine lines etched the corners of his eyes. "Grandpa," Leo said quietly. Malcolm turned, his expression softening at the sight of his grandson. Then his gaze fixed on the bruise, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. He didn't speak, didn't ask what had happened. Instead, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, placing it carefully on the wooden bench between them. It was a medallion, aged and worn, but the imperial seal was unmistakable, the interlocking galaxies that symbolized the Emperor's domain. Not a replica or a souvenir, but an official commendation, the kind given only to those who had served at the highest levels. Leo stared at it, then back at his grandfather. Malcolm's silence was an answer in itself. "He slapped me," Leo said finally. "Krell. When I mentioned you trained the Emperor's Guard," Malcolm nodded once, his jaw tight. "I saw it on the security feed. One of the maintenance supervisors showed me. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Why work as a mechanic when you—" "Some battles aren't won with noise," Malcolm interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "Come on, it's late. We'll talk more tomorrow." That night, Leo lay awake in his small quarters, the medallion clutched in his hand, its edges pressing into his palm. Questions swirled in his mind. If Grandpa Mal had truly trained the Emperor's elite guard, why was he here on this remote outpost, fixing coolant systems and repairing malfunctioning doors? Why had he never spoken of his past? When morning came, Leo found his grandfather waiting outside his quarters, dressed in his usual gray mechanic's uniform. "I'm coming with you today," Malcolm said simply. Leo blinked in surprise. "To the combat deck, but time to set some things straight." They walked together through the main corridors of the outpost, drawing curious glances from passing personnel. Malcolm's presence was a solid, reassuring weight beside Leo as they approached the combat deck, where cadets were already assembling for the day's training. A hush fell over the room as they entered. Krell stood at the center of the mat, his yellow eyes narrowing as they fixed on Malcolm. "Malcolm Reynolds," he sneered. "Come to complain about your grandson's discipline, or perhaps to share more tall tales about your illustrious past?" The cadets tittered nervously, but Malcolm said nothing. Instead, he walked calmly to the edge of the mat and stepped out of his boots. In his plain socks, he stepped onto the training surface and stood, hands at his sides, expression neutral. Krell laughed, the sound echoing off the high ceiling. "What's this? The mechanic thinks he can challenge me?" He turned to the assembled cadets. "Watch closely. This is what happens to those who spread lies about their abilities." Leo's heart hammered in his chest as Krell advanced on his grandfather. The alien instructor was nearly 2 feet taller, his forearms rippling with muscle, his movements predatory and confident. "Speak up, human," Krell taunted. "Tell us all about your adventures training the Emperor's Guard." Malcolm remained silent, his posture relaxed but alert. When Krell lunged forward, the attack was blindingly fast, but Malcolm was faster. In 5 seconds, it was over. Malcolm sidestepped, pivoted, and executed a sequence of moves so fluid they seemed choreographed. Somehow, impossibly. Krell was on the mat, pinned, Malcolm's knee in the small of his back and one arm twisted at a painful angle. The silence that followed was absolute. Every cadet stood frozen, disbelief etched on their faces. Then, from somewhere near the entrance, a small recording drone buzzed forward, its camera eye fixed on the scene. More followed, and suddenly the combat deck was swarming with media drones, capturing the image of the outpost's most feared instructor subdued by an aging mechanic. Violence, Malcolm said, his voice quiet but carrying in the hush, is the last resort of a teacher, not the first. Fear doesn't build warriors. It builds cowards who bully those weaker than themselves. He released Krell and stepped back, allowing the alien to rise. Krell's face was a mask of fury and humiliation as he staggered to his feet, rubbing his twisted arm. "You," he began. But his words were drowned out by the sudden influx of people pouring onto the combat deck outpost security, administrative personnel, and more media drones, drawn by the commotion. Leo watched it all unfold with a growing sense of pride. His grandfather stood calmly in the center of the storm, answering questions with quiet dignity, neither boasting nor embellishing the truth. Yes, he had trained the Emperor's Guard for 15 years. No, he had not sought recognition. Yes, he had chosen to retire to Outpost Nexus 7 as a mechanic. "Why keep it secret?" one reporter asked. Malcolm's gaze found Leo's across the crowd. "Some legacies are best passed on through actions, not words." The aftermath was swift and far-reaching. The Federation launched an investigation into Krell's teaching methods, and his license was quickly revoked when other cadets and their parents came forward with testimonies of abuse, intimidation, and even extortion. The combat deck was temporarily closed, its doors locked as officials combed through records and conducted interviews. The community of cadets and families that had formed around the training center found themselves adrift, uncertain where to turn for continued education. It was in this vacuum that Malcolm and Leo began to transform the hydroponics garden. First, they cleared a section of floor space, laying down simple mats salvaged from storage. Then they set up a few basic training dummies. There was no formal announcement, no advertisements, just Malcolm and Leo, practicing together in the warm amber light of the garden each afternoon. On the third day, the lanky Centaurian appeared, standing hesitantly at the entrance until Leo noticed and waved him in. By the end of the week, there were 12 cadets, human, Andromedan, Centaurian, and others arriving voluntarily, barefoot, training gloves in hand. Zeph, a 15-year-old human cadet with close-cropped hair and intense eyes, posted a testimonial that went viral across the outpost's communication network. "Real strength isn't about fear," she said, her voice steady as she looked into the camera. "It's about protection. It's about honor. That's what we're learning now." A tentacled girl from the aquatic section organized a petition, gathering signatures to formally establish a new, ethical training group under Malcolm's guidance. Parents began to arrive with their children, watching from the sidelines as Malcolm demonstrated techniques with patient precision. "No slapping," he told them on the first day, "or no humiliation. We train to protect, not to dominate." The garden dojo, as the cadets began to call it, was a stark contrast to the sterile combat deck. Here, natural light filtered through the transparent ceiling panels, and living vines curled around support columns. The smell of earth and growing things mixed with the scent of exertion as cadets practiced on mats laid directly on the soft ground. Malcolm seemed to wrestle with the decision to formalize the academy. "I didn't come here to teach," he confided to Leo one evening as they cleaned the mats after training. "I came here to fade into the background." "Why?" Leo asked, the question that had been burning in him since the confrontation with Krell. Malcolm was quiet for a long moment. "Pride," he said finally. "It's a dangerous thing, Leo. I saw what it did to some of my students when they joined the Guard. Power without humility corrupts. I wanted a simpler life. But you're teaching again now." A small smile crossed Malcolm's weathered face. "So I am. But differently this time, with better priorities." The Federation ethics investigator arrived a month after the incident on the combat deck. She was a stern-faced woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her uniform pristine as she observed a training session from the edge of the garden. "Unofficial training centers are not typically sanctioned," she said afterward, her tablet hovering at her elbow as she addressed Malcolm. "But given the circumstances and the community support, the Federation is prepared to offer provisional certification." Malcolm considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Under whose authority? Who would oversee the curriculum?" "You would, Master Reynolds. With Federation guidance, of course." "Not Master," Malcolm corrected gently. "Just Malcolm. And I'm not interested in creating another rigid hierarchy. This needs to be community-led." The investigator raised an eyebrow. "That's unconventional." Iso was training the Emperor's Guard to prioritize defense over aggression. They called me unconventional then too. In the end, a compromise was reached. The Earn Honor Academy, as it came to be known, received official sanction with a unique governance structure, a council of students, parents, and teachers who would collectively determine the curriculum and rules. The medallion transfer happened 6 months after Krell's departure from Outpost Nexus 7. It wasn't planned as a ceremony. Malcolm simply called Leo to the center of the garden during an evening training session, the other students forming a natural circle around them. "This belonged to a different time," Malcolm said, placing the Imperial medallion in Leo's palm. "But the values it represents: discipline, protection, honor, those are timeless. You've earned it, not because you're my grandson, but because you've shown what real strength looks like." Leo's fingers closed around the medallion, warm from his grandfather's hand. Around them, the garden was quiet, the cadets watching with respectful attention. It wasn't pomp and circumstance, but something more meaningful, a genuine moment of transition. The Federation's audit of combat training facilities expanded beyond Outpost Nexus 7, sparked by the publicity surrounding Krell's misconduct. Other abusive centers came under scrutiny, and new guidelines were implemented across the sector, emphasizing ethical teaching practices and positive reinforcement. Leo found himself stepping into a leadership role naturally, not because he sought it, but because the younger cadets looked to him as an example. He led morning warm-ups and worked with beginners, his quiet confidence a reassuring presence in the garden dojo. Malcolm, for his part, seemed content to gradually transition into a mentor role, often sitting to the side during sessions, offering guidance only when needed. He watched with evident satisfaction as his grandson blossomed into a compassionate, capable leader. "You know," the lanky Centaurian said to Leo one day as they adjusted a training dummy, "I never thought I'd enjoy training again after Krell. I was this close to quitting." He held 2 of his forearms a millimeter apart. Leo smiled. "Me too. Funny how things work out." "Not funny. Intentional," the Centaurian corrected. "Your grandfather changed everything. And now you're changing things too." The garden dojo continued to evolve, the mats showing worn patches from constant use, the hydroponic vines swaying gently above the training area. It stood as a living monument to transformation, proof that even in the vast, cold expanse of space, growth and change were possible. Krell's fate remained ambiguous. Rumors circulated that he had found work on a distant mining colony, or that he had joined a mercenary group on the Outer Rim. But on Outpost Nexus 7, his name became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when power was wielded without wisdom. The final surprise came nearly a year after the incident on the combat deck. Leo was leading a cool-down session when a figure appeared in the garden entrance. A young Andromedan with familiar iridescent scales. "I heard this place was different," the former cadet said, his usual smirk replaced by an uncertain expression. "That anyone could train here, regardless of their past." Leo exchanged a glance with his grandfather, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "That's right," Leo said, extending a hand. "Everyone starts fresh here, no grudges." The Andromedan hesitated, then stepped forward, taking Leo's hand. "I was wrong. About your grandfather, about you. We all get things wrong sometimes," Leo replied. "The important thing is learning from it." As the new cadet joined the circle, Malcolm caught Leo's eye and smiled, a private moment of acknowledgement between them. This, Leo realized, was the true legacy his grandfather had passed on. Not the medallion, not the combat techniques, but the understanding that real strength lay in protecting others, speaking truth, and fostering growth. The hydroponics garden hummed with life around them, the cadets moving through their forms with focused attention. Outside, the vast blackness of space pressed against the outpost's reinforced windows. But here, in this pocket of warmth and light, a community had taken root and flourished. Leo touched the medallion he now wore on a simple cord around his neck, feeling its weight not as a burden, but as a reminder. Honor wasn't claimed, it was earned. And sometimes, the quietest voices carried the most powerful truths. The media storm eventually died down, but the story of the mechanic who had once trained the Emperor's Guard spread throughout the sector. Occasionally, visitors would arrive at the garden dojo, hoping to catch a glimpse of the legendary Malcolm Reynolds. They were often surprised to find him kneeling in the soil, tending to plants, or quietly observing from the sidelines as his grandson led training sessions. "Is it true?" they would ask. "Did you really train the Emperor's elite guard?" Malcolm's answer was always the same. "What matters isn't what I did then. It's what we're doing now." The Earn Honor Academy grew, eventually expanding beyond the hydroponics garden into a dedicated facility, one with large windows and natural light, where training mats lay beside growing plants, and where respect was the foundation of every lesson. Leo, as he approached his 16th birthday, found himself reflecting on the journey that had begun with a slap and a bruised cheek. The pain of that moment had faded, but the lessons remained, embedded in the community they had built together. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked his grandfather one evening as they sat watching the artificial sunset from the garden's observation platform. "Training the Emperor's Guard? Being at the center of galactic politics?" Malcolm considered the question, his weathered hands resting lightly on his knees. "No," he said finally. "That life had its purpose. But this..." He gestured to the garden dojo below, where a few dedicated cadets were still practicing. "This has more meaning." Leo nodded, understanding. It wasn't about titles or prestige or power. It was about impact, about the ripples that spread outward from even the smallest actions. The tentacled girl, now a senior student, approached them with a data tablet. "The new curriculum is ready for review," she said, her appendages manipulating the device with graceful precision. "The council voted unanimously to include the ethics component." Malcolm smiled. "Good. That's the foundation everything else builds upon." As she left, Leo turned back to his grandfather. "You never told me how you ended up training the Emperor's Guard in the first place." A distant look crossed Malcolm's face. "Another time, perhaps. Some stories are better saved for the right moment." Leo accepted this with a nod. There would be time for those stories. For now, it was enough to know that the legacy he was part of was one built on integrity and quiet strength. The next morning brought news that the Federation was implementing the Reynolds Protocol across all combat training facilities, a set of ethical guidelines based on the principles Malcolm had established at the Garden Dojo. It was a validation of everything they had worked for. Yet Malcolm received the news with characteristic humility. "Names aren't important," he told the excited cadets who rushed to congratulate him. "It's the ideas that matter." Zephyr, now an assistant instructor, rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Just take the win, Malcolm. The entire sector is adopting your methods." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Our methods. This was built by all of us." As the academy flourished, Leo found himself increasingly drawn to the engineering aspects of combat training. He began designing modified training drones that could adapt to different species' physiologies, making the exercises more inclusive for the diverse cadets who now trained with them. "You've got your grandfather's hands," observed the maintenance supervisor who had first shown Malcolm the security feed of Leo being slapped. "Good at fixing things." Leo looked up from the drone he was calibrating. "And breaking them, when necessary," he added with a slight smile. The supervisor laughed. "That too. Your grandfather broke a lot of conventions when he trained the Emperor's Guard, made some powerful enemies in the process." This was new information. Leo set down his tools. "Enemies? Why do you think he ended up here, working as a mechanic on a remote outpost? Not exactly a promotion from Imperial combat trainer." Before Leo could press for more details, an alert chimed throughout the facility, incoming vessels requesting emergency docking. Within minutes, the calm routine of the outpost was disrupted as medical teams rushed to prepare for casualties. "Training accident at Sector 6 outpost," Malcolm explained as he and Leo helped clear space in the medical bay. "We're the closest facility with adequate treatment capabilities." The injured began arriving soon after, cadets and instructors from another training facility, their bodies bearing the unmistakable marks of combat gone wrong. Burns, lacerations, broken bones, the evidence of a system that prioritized results over safety. As Leo helped a young Martian cadet to a treatment pod, he caught snippets of conversation from the facility's administrator, a tall, nervous man with darting eyes. "Unavoidable accident," the administrator was saying to the outpost's medical director. "These things happen in combat training. The risks are understood." Malcolm, who had been assisting nearby, straightened and turned. "No," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "These things don't happen in proper training. They're allowed to happen by negligent instruction." The administrator's face flushed. "And who are you to make such accusations?" A hush fell over the medical bay as personnel and patients alike turned to watch the confrontation. "Malcolm Reynolds," said the medical director, stepping between them. "Former head trainer of the Emperor's Elite Guard and current instructor at our Earn Honor Academy." The administrator's expression shifted from indignation to shock. "Reynolds? But you disappeared years ago." "I retired," Malcolm corrected. "There's a difference." Later, as the situation stabilized and the injured cadets were settled into recovery, Leo found his grandfather in a quiet corner of the medical bay, studying a data tablet with intense concentration. "What is it?" Leo asked, noting the grim set of Malcolm's mouth. "Training logs from their facility. The medical director gave me access." He passed the tablet to Leo. "Look at the protocols they're using. They're almost identical to..." Krell's methods, Leo finished, scanning the information. But more extreme, higher injury rates, more severe penalties for failure. Malcolm nodded. Krell wasn't an isolated case. He was part of a systemone that's still operating in parts of the sector. That night, as they walked back to their quarters, Leo could sense a new tension in his grandfather's posture. "You're going to do something about it, aren't you?" Malcolm was quiet for a long moment. "Not me," he said finally. "Us. The Academy. This is bigger than one person." The next day, Malcolm called a council meeting at the Garden Dojo. Cadets, parents, and instructors gathered in a circle, sitting cross-legged on the training mats as Malcolm explained what they had discovered. "The Federation's reforms haven't reached everywhere," he concluded. "There are still facilities operating under the old methods: fear, pain, humiliation. What happened yesterday was the result." "So what do we do?" asked the tentacled girl, her appendages coiling and uncoiling with agitation. It was Leo who answered, surprising himself with his own certainty. "We expand. Not just our facility, but our approach. We send instructors to other outposts. We share our curriculum openly. We make the Reynolds Protocol more than just a set of guidelines. We make it a movement." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly. Zeph leaned forward, her eyes bright with purpose. "We could start with Sector 6. Those cadets we treated, they've seen the difference in how we operate. They'd be receptive." "It won't be easy," Malcolm cautioned. "The old system has deep roots. There will be resistance." "Like the resistance you faced when you changed the Emperor's Guard training?" Leo asked. A shadow crossed Malcolm's face. "Similar, yes. And yet you did it," Leo pressed. "You changed an institution that had existed for centuries." Malcolm looked around the circle, at the faces turned toward him, expectant, determined, hopeful. "Not alone," he said finally. "Never alone. That was my mistake back then, trying to carry the weight of change by myself." The plan took shape over the following weeks. The council selected a team of instructors and senior cadets who would travel to Sector 6, not to take over, but to offer an alternative approach. They prepared demonstrations, teaching materials, and testimonials from cadets who had thrived under the earn honor philosophy. Leo, to his surprise, was chosen to lead the delegation. "Me?" he questioned when the council announced their decision. "But I'm only 16. Shouldn't someone more experienced?" "Age isn't the measure of leadership," his grandfather interrupted gently. "You understand the heart of what we're doing here better than anyone. You've lived both sides of this story." The night before the delegation was set to depart, Leo found his grandfather in their usual spot in the hydroponics garden, gazing up at the stars visible through the transparent ceiling panels. "Nervous?" Malcolm asked as Leo sat beside him. "A little," Leo admitted. "What if they don't listen? What if they see us as interfering outsiders?" Malcolm's hand came to rest on his shoulder. "They might. Change is never easy to accept, especially for those who've built their identities around the old ways." "Like Krell." "Like Krell," Malcolm agreed. "But remember this, Leo, you're not going there to tear down. You're going to build up, to offer something better. That makes all the difference." Leo fingered the medallion around his neck. "When you trained the Emperor's Guard, did you know you were changing things? Or did it just happen?" Malcolm's expression grew distant. "I knew. The old methods were producing soldiers who were brutal but brittle, strong in a direct confrontation but quick to break under pressure. The Emperor needed guards who could think, adapt, show restraint when needed. It wasn't popular at first. What changed their minds? Results," Malcolm said simply. "The proof was in the performance. When the new guard prevented an assassination attempt without a single casualty on either side, even the traditionalists had to acknowledge the value of our approach. Leo absorbed this, drawing strength from the quiet confidence in his grandfather's voice. I'll remember that. Show. Don't just tell. The delegation departed the next morning, their small transport vessel breaking away from Outpost Nexus 7 and setting course for Sector 6. Leo stood at the viewport, watching as the outpost receded into the distance, the place that had transformed from a site of humiliation to a home, from a hostile training ground to a community of growth. Beside him, Zeph adjusted the training manuals stored in her pack. Never thought I'd be doing this when I signed up for combat training, she remarked. Thought I'd be learning to fight, not to teach. We're still learning to fight, Leo said, just different battles. Sector 6. Outpost was a stark contrast to Nexus 7, all sharp angles and utilitarian design, with minimal concessions to comfort or aesthetics. The delegation was met with formal politeness but underlying skepticism from the administrators, who had agreed to the visit more out of political necessity than genuine interest. We appreciate your concern, said the head administrator, the same nervous man from the medical bay incident. But our methods have produced top-tier warriors for generations. One unfortunate accident doesn't invalidate our entire approach. We're not here to invalidate, Leo responded, keeping his voice level. We're here to share an alternative that might complement your existing strengths. The administrator's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course. You're welcome to observe today's training sessions and present your alternative to any interested instructors afterward. The combat deck of Sector 6 was twice the size of Nexus 7's, with state-of-the-art equipment and sophisticated training drones. But as Leo and his team watched from the observation platform, the familiar patterns of fear-based instruction were unmistakable. Instructors berating cadets for minor errors. Punishment drills that bordered on torturous, the palpable tension that hung in the recycled air. It's like watching Krell all over again, Zeph murmured, but multiplied by 20. Leo nodded, his jaw tight. This wouldn't be as simple as they'd hoped. The system here was entrenched. The instructors invested in the traditional approach. Change would require more than a few demonstrations and testimonials. After the training session, they were permitted to use a small conference room for their presentation. Only 3 instructors attended, their expressions ranging from bored to openly hostile. Let me guess, said one, a muscular woman with cybernetic enhancements gleaming at her temples. You're going to tell us that kindness and positive reinforcement build better warriors than discipline and consequences. Not exactly, Leo replied, meeting her gaze. We're going to show you. He nodded to Zeph, who activated a holographic display. It showed comparative performance metrics, reaction times, endurance levels, strategic decision-making scores between cadets trained under Krell's methods and those from the Earn Honor Academy. These are independently verified by Federation standards. Leo explained. The results speak for themselves. Our cadets consistently outperform in every category except one: willingness to inflict unnecessary harm. A murmur of interest from one of the instructors, quickly suppressed. That's all very nice on paper, said the cybernetically enhanced woman. But combat isn't about metrics, but it's about survival, about killing before you're killed. Is it? Leo asked quietly. Or is it about protecting what matters? About making decisions under pressure that you can live with afterward? The room fell silent. Leo could sense the resistance in the instructors, but also a flicker of something else: curiosity, perhaps, or doubt in their own certainties. We're not asking you to abandon everything you know, he continued. We're offering tools to expand your approach, to keep what works and replace what doesn't. By the end of the presentation, they had secured permission for a practical demonstration the following day, a small victory, but significant. The delegation returned to their assigned quarters cautiously optimistic. "They're listening," Zeph said as they prepared for sleep. "Not enthusiastically, but they're listening." Leo nodded, fingers absently tracing the outline of the medallion beneath his tunic. Grandpa said it would take time, that it took him years to fully transform the Emperor's Guard. "We don't have years," Zeph pointed out. "No," Leo agreed. "But we have something he didn't have at first, proof that the new way works. And tomorrow, we show them directly." The demonstration the next day drew a larger audience than expected, not just the 3 instructors from the previous day, but several others, along with a handful of senior cadets who had been granted permission to observe. They gathered in a smaller training room, arranged in a circle around a simple mat that the delegation had brought with them. Leo stood at the center, bare feet planted firmly on the mat. "Combat training isn't just about physical techniques," he began. "It's about mindset, about understanding the difference between dominance and mastery." He gestured to one of the Sector 6 instructors, a towering man with a shaved head and scars crisscrossing his exposed arms. "Would you assist me in a demonstration?" The instructor stepped forward, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Happy to, boy. Attack me," Leo said calmly, "however you wish." The instructor's smirk widened. He circled Leo slowly, then launched a lightning-fast series of strikes aimed at vulnerable points: throat, solar plexus, knee. The attacks were precise, powerful, designed to incapacitate. Leo moved like water, redirecting rather than blocking, absorbing and channeling the instructor's energy rather than opposing it directly. When the flurry of attacks concluded, Leo stood unharmed, and the instructor found himself slightly off balance. His aggression turned to disadvantage. "Impressive reflexes," the instructor acknowledged grudgingly. "But in real combat—" "This is real combat," Leo interrupted. "The goal isn't to hurt you. It's to protect myself while giving you the opportunity to reconsider your approach." He turned to address the wider audience. "The traditional methods train cadets to attack with maximum force. Our approach teaches them to respond with appropriate force to match the threat level exactly. No more and no less." The cybernetically enhanced woman from the previous day stepped forward. "And when the threat is lethal? When hesitation means death? Then lethal force is justified," Leo conceded. "But how often is that truly the case? How many conflicts escalate because we're trained to always respond with maximum aggression?" A murmur rippled through the gathered instructors. Leo could see the skepticism in some faces, but also thoughtfulness in others. Seeds of doubt had been planted. Over the next 3 days, the delegation continued their demonstrations, working with small groups of cadets who volunteered to try the new approach. Progress was slow but steady, each successful session adding to their credibility, each improved performance metric strengthening their case. On the 4th day, an unexpected visitor arrived at their morning session, a tall, distinguished woman in the formal attire of a Federation Inspector General. Her presence sent the Sector 6 administrators into a flurry of anxious activity. Inspector General Kwan, the head administrator, greeted her, his nervous demeanor more pronounced than ever. "We weren't expecting an inspection this quarter." "This isn't a scheduled inspection, Administrator Voss," she replied coolly. "I'm here to evaluate the implementation of the Reynolds Protocol across all combat training facilities in this sector." Leo exchanged a glance with Zeph. This was unexpected and potentially game-changing. Inspector General Kwan observed their demonstration session with keen attention, making occasional notes on her data tablet. Afterward, she requested a private meeting with Leo and the delegation. The Federation Council has been monitoring your Academy's results with great interest. She informed them once they were seated in a conference room. The data is compelling. So compelling, in fact, that they voted to accelerate the implementation of the Reynolds Protocol across all training facilities. Leo leaned forward. That's excellent news, Inspector. It is, she agreed. But it presents challenges. Resistance to change is strong, particularly in traditional institutions like Sector 6. That's why I'm here to provide official weight to your efforts. You're supporting us? Zeph asked, surprise evident in her voice. Inspector General Kwan's expression remained neutral, but her eyes were warm. The Federation supports effective, ethical training methods. Your Academy has proven its approach meets both criteria. Now it's a matter of helping others make the transition successfully. With the Inspector General's backing, the dynamics at Sector 6 shifted dramatically. Administrators who had been resistant suddenly became cooperative. Instructors who had dismissed the delegation's methods were now attentive students. Amazing how quickly attitudes change when official policy is involved. Zephyr remarked as they prepared for an expanded demonstration session that would include most of the outpost's instructors. Leo smiled. Grandpa would say it's human nature or alien nature, I suppose. We resist change until it becomes more uncomfortable to stay the same. The session was their most successful yet. With the Inspector General observing from the sidelines, Leo and his team guided the Sector 6 instructors through basic principles of the Reynolds Protocol: respect for all participants. Graduated force appropriate to the situation, emphasis on protection rather than dominance. The transition won't happen overnight, Leo told them. It took us months at Nexus 7 to fully integrate these principles. But the improvement in cadet performance and well-being begins immediately. As the demonstration concluded, the cybernetically enhanced instructor approached Leo. I've been teaching combat for 15 years, she said, her voice low. Trained under the old system, taught the old system. Never questioned it until now. Leo nodded, sensing her internal conflict. Change is difficult, especially when it challenges our foundations. Your grandfather, she said, he really trained the Emperor's Guard? He did. I trained there for a while after he left. They still talked about him, some with respect, others with resentment. But they all acknowledged that he changed everything. She paused. They said he left because of political pressure. That powerful people wanted a return to the old ways. Leo absorbed this, another piece of the puzzle that was his grandfather's past. He never told me the details. Some battles leave scars we don't talk about, she said, tapping the cybernetic implant at her temple. Doesn't mean we didn't win them. The delegation extended their stay at Sector 6 for 2 full weeks, working closely with instructors and administrators to begin the transition to the new methods. By the time they prepared to depart, the atmosphere in the training facility had noticeably shifted, still disciplined, still focused on excellence, but with an underlying current of respect that had been absent before. You'll face setbacks. Leo warned the instructors during their final session. Old habits resurface under stress. The important thing is to recognize when it happens and correct course. The head administrator, who had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation, nodded solemnly. We'll be in regular contact with your academy, and Inspector General Kwan has promised monthly evaluations to help us stay on track. As the delegation's transport vessel prepared for departure, Leo stood at the viewport, watching Sector 6 outpost grow smaller against the backdrop of space. He felt a mix of emotion, satisfaction at what they had accomplished, awareness of how much work remained, and a deepening appreciation for his grandfather's journey. When they returned to Outpost Nexus 7, the Garden Dojo was buzzing with activity. Word of their success had spread, and new requests for training delegations had arrived from 3 other sectors. Malcolm greeted them with quiet pride, listening intently as Leo recounted their experiences. When the others had dispersed to rest and reconnect with family, grandfather and grandson remained in the garden, sitting beside a newly planted section of earth roses. Inspector General Kwan mentioned something interesting, Leo said after a comfortable silence. She said the Federation Council had been monitoring our Academy's results for months, that they had data I didn't even know we were collecting. Malcolm smiled slightly. The Federation has always had an interest in effective training methods. They just needed proof that ethical approaches could produce better results than traditional ones. You knew, Leo realized. You've been in contact with them all along. I may have had some conversations, Malcolm admitted. Shared some insights from my experience with the Emperor's Guard. Leo shook his head, amazed at his grandfather's quiet influence. Why not tell me? Why let me think we were just a small academy trying to make a difference on our own? Because you needed to believe in it completely. Malcolm replied, to advocate for it without the weight of official backing. The passion of someone fighting for what they believe in is more convincing than any policy directive. Leo thought about this, about how his perspective had shaped his approach at Sector 6. It worked, he acknowledged. But now that I know, now that you know, nothing changes. Malcolm said firmly. The work is the same. The principles are the same. The only difference is understanding that you're part of something larger, a shift that's been building for years. Leo fingered the medallion around his neck. Like you were with the Emperor's Guard. Like I tried to be, Malcolm corrected. I made mistakes, Leo. Pushed too hard in some ways, not hard enough in others. Was too focused on the system and not enough on the people within it. His weathered hand came to rest on Leo's shoulder. You're doing it better. The warmth of his grandfather's approval filled Leo with a sense of purpose that went beyond the successes of the past weeks. This wasn't just about combat training or even about correcting abusive systems. It was about the continuous, challenging work of creating spaces where people could grow into their best selves. As night fell over the hydroponics garden, the artificial lighting dimmed to simulate evening on Earth. Leo looked up at the stars visible through the transparent ceiling panels, thinking about all the outposts and academies scattered across those distant points of light. Each one a potential garden dojo, each one a chance to grow something new. What's next? He asked his grandfather. Malcolm smiled, his eyes reflecting the starlight. That's up to you. The path is open. Leo nodded, understanding. Some legacies weren't about following in exact footsteps, but about continuing the journey in your own way. His hand closed around the medallion, not a weight of expectation, but a reminder of possibility. In the quiet garden, surrounded by growing things, grandfather and grandson sat together beneath the stars, connected by more than blood, by a shared vision of strength rooted in protection, of power tempered by wisdom, of honor earned through actions rather than claimed through words. The story that had begun with a slap on a combat deck had transformed into something neither of them could have predicted, a movement spreading across the stars, changing not just how warriors were trained, but how they understood their purpose. And it had all started with a simple truth, spoken by a 14-year-old boy. Grandpa Mal trained the Emperor's elite guard. Not a boast, not a plea for special treatment, but a quiet statement of fact that had rippled outward, creating change that would echo long after both Malcolm and Leo had returned to the stars.